I'll talk a little bit about what we did last time. And Bastion, if you can, maybe drop the link for the video for last month's, in case
Absolutely.
people want to get up to speed on that. So anyway, a little bit about me. My name is Ed Gonzalez. I'm a Microsoft Business Applications MVP, Microsoft Certified Trainer, and a Power Automate super user. My focus is on Power Automate, some Dynamics 365. That's kind of how I got started in things. Actually, I got started in Power BI, but I can't really hold a candle to anybody. I just like making pretty pictures. And so that's what I do inside there. I do some speaking and blogging at flyingpolymath.com. And also, you can find me on Twitter at Powered by Edgy. And then, as the picture shows, I also will foster kittens in my non-existent free time. So the flow so far is so what we had was a challenge, and I'll show the SharePoint list that we were working from. But essentially, we have a list of things. Each thing has an owner, and we want to essentially send each owner a summary or a list of their respective things. And so this is the steps to get us there, and that's the stuff that's covered in the video from last time. And then what we're going to do this time is just kind of pretty up that HTML table, right? So I'll bounce over to, actually, let me show you what the email looks like from last time, right? So here's the result of our thing last time. It's ugly, right? And I'm not going to do anything about all the extraneous data. But what I am going to do is just kind of show you how to quickly format the table. I am not a developer. I am not an HTML person. That'll make itself pretty apparent in a moment. But if you're not a developer, don't hang up now. Stay on, and you'll see how you can kind of dress up your tables a little bit so that they look a little bit cooler without really getting into a lot of HTML. There's a little bit, but not a whole ton of it, right?
What made the
Um,
column stick in that exact size? Was it just willy-nilly or?
yeah, I think so part of what we're going to talk about is some style sheets, right? And I think you can set the column width in there. It'd be one way to do it. I don't know what the default is. It looks like it says, let me make them as skinny as I can so that you have at least 4 or 5 lines worth of gibberish, right?
Mm.
But
Oh,
I
okay.
I don't know if the algorithm is that complex. It may also be some version of a fit to screen. Um, and then the other thing too is it hugely depends on your reader, right? So here is, if I'm looking at the web version, and there's really not a good way to zoom in with this, because obviously the more I zoom in, all it does is just kind of um,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
make everything else bigger, but my table is still itty bitty, right?
Yeah.
So not super helpful. And that's the thing too, about the CSS stuff. As I was doing my research, is a lot of people aren't super excited about putting CSS and HTML emails. Those developer people can give you all the reasons why and why not. And I'll let them have those conversations with you. I'm just basically here to, show you how to make the tables look a little bit better, right? So here's our flow from last time. Actually, so here's our list, right? So here's our SharePoint list, right? And I've got these different items in the title. And then here you can see who they belong to. I've got one thing going to Joe, Lisa, Bob, Joe, Lisa, and so on, right? And so if I were to do the normal, get the list of items and then send an email, Joe would get an email with car, Lisa would get an email with boat, Bob would get an email with plane, then Bob would get another email with ship, and Joe would get another email with truck, and so on, right? And so what we covered last time was basically how to group those so that Joe would get an email with car, truck, and I think that's it. Yeah. And then Lisa would get an email with boat and scooter, right? And then Bob would get an email with the rest of them. So that's what we did last time, is we grouped all of those so that that way they went to each of their respective ones. And so what we want to do this time is just make it a little bit pretty. What I found, and there are a lot of tools that do this kind of thing. So don't feel like you got to, use this one. But I found this thing here that essentially lets us play with it. And I'll have a link to this at the end. But I can do things like, set the background and, change the color of certain things and, make it really gross looking, excuse me, if I wanted to. I don't really need to mess with the size yet because my table is actually already set by, my SharePoint list. Really, all we're talking about is the styling aspects of it, right? Um, and Bastion, I'm not watching the chat at the same time. If anything pops up, other than people going "ew, gross" because of my lack of development skills, you can keep those to yourself. But let me know if there's any other questions that pop up.
You
Right.
got it.
So going back to, the flow as we had it last time. So I've got my manual trigger, but that can be anything. And then I've got my SharePoint list items. And then I'm just grabbing in this step the email address, which would be this column right here. And then the trick to getting the list of unique ones is to do a union where you splash it against itself. So watch the video for that. And then that gives you a list of your unique items. So in this case, it'd be my 3 distinct emails. And then you just cycle through those in and apply to each loop, filtering your array from up here based on that email address, right? And then you create the HTML table from the output. This is where I would probably stick in that select if I wanted to neaten up and just grab the columns that I wanted to email out. And then what I did here was I said report for, and I just grabbed the email address, basically everything before the @ sign using a split. And I got a YouTube video on that if you want to see how to use split. And then I dropped the output from the table in there. Okay, so that's what we got so far. What I want to do is take this CSS stuff and kind of lay that on top of my table, right? So what I'll do first is go into my flow, and then I'm just going to kind of create, a place to hold that CSS, right? So I'll just put in a quick compose, and then I'm just going to rename this like a good boy to CSS, and then I'll grab this stuff, uh, everything here. So this right now is going to give me a result of this ugly looking table with the purple header and the blue in the green text, right? And so I'll just drop that right in there. Okay. Except I need to add some stuff. And this is where the little bit of HTML stuff kind of pops in to kind of indicate. Um, Honestly, I don't know what it's doing. I do a lot of my work with what I call trial and error and error and error and error, or kind of brute force-ish. And so what I found through the, my trial and error and error stuff is that I need to add some of this stuff so that the stuff comes through properly, right? So I think what I'm doing is I'm basically saying, hey, I'm going to put this in HTML, and everything below this stuff is what we'll call the style, right? And then I think this thing right here is what we're naming that style, I think. And so at the end, I'm also going to append and tell it that's the end of my style. That's what the little whack in front of the word style means. Okay. So that's kind of the setup for that. Don't finish cringing yet because there's more.
Does it error out if you don't have that in there?
Oh, okay. Good to know. Oh, if I don't have
Oh, does
the,
it? Yeah, I question you.
oh,
Yeah,
does it
I don't
error
see it.
out?
Yeah,
Probably.
yeah.
Um, I knew enough about HTML to know that, I got to close it. And it'll be interesting because this tag, I don't ever close up, but it still kind of works. And so it
Yeah.
doesn't error out.
Okay.
But that was, that's just something I'm tooling around with and figuring out. Again, the goal was make the table look better, not necessarily. And yeah, let me zoom in a little bit too so people can see that better. Um, okay, so next we're going to go back down to our loop. So I kind of set things up. I've got my style stuff in there. And so now I want to kind of find a way to add that to my table, right? So after I create the HTML table, I kind of have to put that style stuff in front of it, right? Um, but there's a couple of other things I want to do in there first. But let's give us some room to work, and that's where I use Compose a lot, just to kind of give me, um, a place to kind of mess around and do things in. Um, Remember how we called that table, um, or we called it, the style was blue table, right? Somewhere in my the HTML, I have to call out and say, use this style thing, right? And so if I looked at just the table itself now, if I look at the raw outputs, see how it's got this thing? It just says table, right? And that's just going to do a table. But if I look over here at this HTML, oops, too much. Let me zoom in. It's got table and then space class equals blue table. So what I'm actually going to do first is tell it, find this tag in the HTML that you just created with your HTML table and replace it with this. So that way it calls that style sheet and starts to lay that in. So that's the first step here. Is I'm going to do a replace, and then I'm going to replace the output. I'm talking about replacing um, output from my create HTML table, and I'm looking for just table, and I want to replace it with, I don't know if I can just copy and paste this. Let's see. I want to replace it with that, right? So the first step is to replace that plain old table with the table that calls that specific um, class thing, right? But then I also need to add. Um, I'm just looking at my notes real quick to make sure I get this right. Um, yep. And then I also need to put my CSS stuff, or my style stuff, in front of my HTML table, right? So what I'm going to do is add a thing called concat, which is basically concatenate. And then I'm going to put the output from my CSS compose. Just looking for that. There we go. In front of that. And then I'll make sure I close my parens. So now I'm keeping that straight. And then I want, because Outlook kind of freaks out, and this is more that trial and error and error and error stuff. If I just drop this inside the body of the email, it kind of freaks out. So what I found is that if I convert all of this to a string, um, then it likes it a little bit better. So basically, I'm taking whatever output it thinks it is, and I'm saying this is just a string of characters. And then that way, when I come down here to Outlook and I drop that in the body of the email, I should get a table that looks like this, hopefully. I don't know. Any questions so far? Yeah.
I'm not saying anything in chat.
Okay. So we're going to pull
Oh,
the
there's a
trigger.
question.
Oh, what is it? Hang on,
If
let
you
me bounce
tested
over.
this email with CSS in different email clients and devices.
Yeah, so that was the thing that I read about the CSS, and one of the reasons people say just don't do it, right? And the reason for that is because the client that they're using makes a big difference in whether or not it works. And there was somebody did a really good article and basically said a lot of things that I don't understand, but said in certain clients. I think like Eudora or something like that. Like it just won't work at all. And some of these other ones, you'll get this and this won't work. So it's not super awesome to do that. What they said instead was to use just the regular kind of HTML type stuff. But that, in order for me to do that with this list, essentially I would have to rebuild the table inside Power Automate. And I do have a blog article kind of covering that. And I'll drop that in the chat.
Is
Where
that like if I was opening in Firefox or Chrome,
yeah, like, I mean, if,
CSS would run render differently.
Yeah, it would absolutely render different. There's a chance that it would render different because I think a lot of the stuff happens on the client side.
Mm.
Again, I'm not a developer, right? This isn't like what I do. I'm a business user. So, I'm really just trying to solve the problems that I'm faced with. Somebody asked me, hey, can you do this? I knew they were using Outlook in this use case. So I could say, okay, yeah, I can do that, right? Um, but anyway, this blog article talks about rebuilding the table inside Power Automate by essentially using it apply to each loop and grabbing these fields and then adding that to an array and then using the output of that to do the table. And then the next article, which I'm working on now, is laying over the colors and things like that. So I'm going to test this. It's going to yell at me and basically say, you've got this get list of items, or not. Maybe sometimes when you don't have an OData filter, it gets angry with you and says, you could potentially, have a really big list. So, be careful. And then I'll go over here to my inbox that I set up just before this meeting and wait for it to sync. And while that's doing that, I'll bounce over here just to see how it looks. Okay, so far kind of looks okay. There we go. So here you can see I've got my 3 emails for Lisa, Joe, and Bob. And oh, that's on the online version. Sorry, that's why it looks so weird. It's taken a while to get to the Outlook, but you can see teeny tiny,
Yeah,
right?
it's there.
It's purple with the green background. So when
You
it
can't
comes
right
into
click, do like open a new.
Ah,
No.
let's try it. Like
Inspect.
inspect, right? And I don't
That's
want to
the
do.
most CSS HTML I do is when I right click and if I'm looking for a client logo to put up on a Power BI workspace and I want
Yeah,
their true logo,
yeah.
that's about the extent of my developer
There we
tools
go.
there.
There
There
we
we
go.
go.
So here you can see much
Yeah.
bigger. I still have a bunch of extraneous data, but like I said, we weren't going to cover that. But you can see, I was able to change the header and to a different color. The website that I'm using, I can also change, things like the border and the padding and, these little guys down here. That's all part of this HTML aspect of it. But I was really just grabbing this color part, right?
What's that
Um,
width at 100%? Because I was
which
always curious about the column width before.
Oh,
So on the
up here?
left-hand side,
Yeah.
no, it's the width right there, 100%. Kind of the left table.
Oh, over
Yeah,
here.
right there. Does that still affect your code?
Probably. Yeah. I
Eh,
didn't mess around with it. There you go. Yeah. So if I took
okay.
that out, that might do something. But it's a fun thing to check out, right? Like for those of us that don't
Yeah,
know code,
for sure.
this is the trial and error part. It's the thing you can do while you're sitting down in front of your desk waiting for, Power Automate Desktop to do its thing, or maybe for Dynamics to load. It just kind of gives you a way to poke it around, or you can actually crack open a book and learn this stuff for real. That's up to you. But this is just one of my learning methods is to kind of just get in there and do stuff and make a mess and then clean it up, right? And so that's kind of how I ended up here with this thing, right? What else? Let me bounce back over to this to make sure I covered all this stuff. So we did that, and then I basically took it from this ugly mess to this slightly less ugly mess. And the reason that was helpful was because I was able to essentially color match this or use the or the client's design language so that the colors matched their brand and it looked familiar and felt good to them, right? And then here's some links. So I'll flip this to Bastion, and so he can post that, wherever, or you can just grab these. But Power Automate, sorry for the extra D, Power Automate Ed, guided learning. And then reference guide for functions is one of my go-tos. That has a list of all of the functions that you can use inside Power Automate, and how to use them, right? And then my blog, flyingpolymath.com, and then there's the short link to the community, and then also that table formatting. No affiliation. It's just one of the ones I found. So, if you dig it, cool. And then, like I said, you can follow me on Twitter. Anything else?
That was good. Thank you. I didn't get
Yes.
that first bit.ly link to work there.
Oh, let me check it out.
Man, I can try and drop the other ones in there
Yeah.
if I could catch up there.
Yeah. Well, okay, cool. PowerPoint decided to take a break.
Oh,
Well, see, it gets angry because it's like the redheaded stepchild of the Power Platform. It's like, I've got Power in my name. Why can't I be part of the Power Platform? And so anytime
this
I'm using Power Platform and PowerPoint, it gets angry with me.
too much power. Too
So,
much.
okay, so I'll stop sharing.
Cool.
Um,
I think I got one more link to drop in there. Oh, that div table. That's cool. I don't think does Power BI use any sort of C. I mean, not really, right? It's kind of got
no,
its own.
so
Is it yet? No.
it's JSON, right?
Yeah.
So was it Chuck Sterling had his thing. I forget, it was like a something something 2000, right? And it was like you go in there and you put in the colors that you wanted, and then it spit out the JSON that you'd import as kind of like almost like a style sheet, and it would use that palette of colors and those kind of style formats and things like that. I don't remember what it was called,
So
but you guys probably
yeah,
talked
well,
about.
there's Power BI themes you could set. Like these big organizations got it like that. So could you take that JSON into CSS and
Are you asking specifically if I could? The answer is
oh,
no. If
but
one
theoretically,
could, yeah,
yeah,
one might be possible to do that.
yeah.
But that's not something that's inside my wheelhouse. Yeah,
Huh, interesting. Well, it just shows all the stuff you can do together, except everything's JSON, right? At the end of the day.
right. And
Yeah.
so Jamie put in there, Emma Emma Mudd RC. She did work for Click Dimensions, so she talked about inline style as a way to go. And I think it was like Mailchimp or something was where I found one of the articles talking about that. And essentially, it just it was basically saying, if you're gonna send it, include everything with the email, right? And so that was the thing. Again, I'm way outside of my sandbox. I'm probably saying things way wrong, but that is what I read, right?
I think if you're dealing with a corporate client and they're only going to be using it in Outlook or maybe Outlook on their phones, then you have a smaller subset of users and devices you have to worry about
Yeah.
supporting.
Yeah,
It's
if
a
you're
lot
doing like a
harder.
mail blast,
Yeah.
you'd have to know your audience and really kind of understand that. And the specific use case for me was, had a corporate client, had somebody who was basically and Greg and I were having this conversation earlier today where they, I implemented Power BI and I got these cool reports, and they send me this old-timey tabular report, and they're like, can you make it send this to us every week, and this to us every, Monday, and this other one every Friday? And I'm just like, I put my head on the desk and I'm like, yeah, but, and I make the argument, and they're like, yes, but this is how we've always done it. And I'm like, okay, but what about this? You've got it right
Eddie drives me
here.
crazy.
Yeah.
Trust me,
Yeah.
drives me bonkers.
And at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, it's going to be 10 hours. And they're like, okay, sign the checks.
In their defense, this is the one wrinkle that like makes me say, oh, I guess we can do this. Where it comes to the point of the licensing and the end users being those like one time like look at a sheet and then walk away, right? And so for those use cases where it's like, I think at this point it's like 50 managers that just need to look at a sheet once a month. They don't care about analytics. They don't need to see any other like crazy reporting. At that point, I almost feel like it's criminal to get a pro license, and then it's
Well,
also criminal to go at the embedding route. So
yeah.
can you do something where you email this like Excel sheet that's like linked to the data set, or even have just an Excel sheet out on SharePoint that they go and touch and hit refresh. I don't know,
Yeah.
but trust me, I totally get the backwardness.
So in that example, and not to derail the conversation, my challenge to people is always, well, if you only look at this report for so long, what are you doing with the information? Remember, this is all about actionable insights. So if you're just looking at it to consume the data and not make any decisions, free up some time in your day and stop looking at the data, right? Set up parameters that say, if it goes below this or above this, send me an email, do something, but don't look at it just to look at it. Get out there and do the stuff that you're meant to do, and not focus on these numbers that really, if they're within spec, don't worry about it. Just go do other things. Be brilliant otherwise. But a lot of they're just like, yeah, but I've always gotten this report for the last 17 years, and I'd like to keep getting it. Okay, so it's a security blanket. It's a pacifier, and I'll do that. And like Fernando says, if they pay, they get it. I'm in. So
Well, I think that's a good philosophy either way.
yeah, and Carol, I totally agree. Just make it pull. I mean, that's because what happens is you end up getting into this habit where you email reports and people get onboarded and they want the report too, right? And so that list just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And meanwhile, like, your whatever your email server is, or even if it's online, it's just like getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And nobody looks at the report, right? So just make it a pull thing. So if they want it, they go get the data.
Yeah, I
Anyway.
think it's a change management thing. Like in some of the legacy stuff from the bigger organizations, right? It's like all of these departments, all of these managers used to see it. People already forgot what they're using it for. If anybody's looking at them, and I'll be like, if we take this away, we just don't know what's gonna happen. Like, just try it, and you'll identify exactly who actually uses it and why, right? And this may be a good refresher for
Yeah,
why
you
you
turn
have
it
this.
off and see who complains, right?
Right.
Put in Power BI and check the usage metrics.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the real
Right.
one.
That's my
You want your
soapbox.
license. So
Soapbox.
Yeah.
So close
I
that
think
tab.
you got to be a happy media. Like I work for a big healthcare in there, and they just pass Excel files back and forth all day long.
Right.
Send a query to the data team. Takes them so long to find the stuff. I mean, luckily we've leveraged like a data warehouse, but I found a common place of like, okay, this is a one-time request. Find Excel. Boom, here you go. But then I just started away from Power BI time and time and time again, and we were never getting to like the adoption phase.
Yeah.
Until I built the vaccine report, and I'm like, for you to do your job, you kind of like have to look at these pages. So that was like the big win in there. Yeah,
All right.
it's got to take
So
that.
anyway, so
Okay.
that's pretty HTML tables. Ta-da. For
Thank you,
a
Ed.
business user. Yeah.
Thanks, Ed.
My pleasure.
Awesome.